Hello and welcome to Chart Chat number 51. We are so excited to be here today with our wonderful guest, Lisa Charlotte Muth. If you are interested and curious about colors in the world of data visualization, there is no one we would rather be talking with and chatting with over the next hour. So stay tuned for a lot on colors and data viz, the science, accessibility, your brand, all kinds of bits and pieces you can apply in your work. And with that, this is Chart Chat. So we celebrated our wonderful Chart Chat number 50 at the Tableau conference last month. As a preview to our wrap up at the end, you will have a chance to catch that if you missed it. And we'll tell you all about it when we wrap up today. I'm Amanda Makulec. I am the Executive Director for the Global Data Visualization Society, a co-host here of Chart Chat, and a public health data viz designer based here in Washington, D.C. And I'm here with my wonderful co-hosts who I'll let do a quick round of introductions and then let our guest of honor today introduce herself and share a bit about where she's coming to us from and her background and what we're here to chat about today. Andy, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Andy Cotgreave, evangelist, Tableau, host of Data Viz, and co-author of the Big Book of Dashboards. Great to be here. Steve?
Steve Wexler, Chief Chart Looker at Data Revelations, one of 3 authors of the Big Book of Dashboards, and soon to be one of 4 authors of Dashboards That Deliver. Jeff
Shaffer here from the University of Cincinnati in Ohio, but today I'm coming from you on a lake in Wisconsin. It looks like I'm in a cave, but it's actually quite beautiful. So enjoying the time. Also co-author of the Big Book of Dashboards and soon to be co-authors of another dashboard book.
Exciting. And Lisa, welcome to the Chart Chat stage. Share where you're joining us from and who you are and what you do, in case someone somehow doesn't know your amazing work on color and other things in Data Viz.
Well, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. Thanks for having me. My name is Lisa. I'm joining from Berlin, where Datawrapper is based, which is a Data Viz tool I'm working for and at. I'm responsible for the communications at Datawrapper, the blog, social media, an Unwrapped conference we just organized, all these things. And yeah, I wrote a lot of blog posts about color.
They are excellent, and we'll dig all into some of the themes from some of those posts. Though I will say, when we were doing our prep call, we always do a prep call with our guests for Chart Chat, and I learned that Lisa had a 4-hour workshop she could give us. I was tempted to ask if we could do an extended Chart Chat. So today we're excited to welcome Lisa to the Chart Chat stage and have her be our guest for the next hour. As you know, if you've joined us before, this is more than just chit chat. It's Chart Chat, where we dive into all of the good, the bad, the scaredy cats of the data visualization world, and hopefully leave you with actionable, practical things that you can apply in your data viz work. You're always encouraged to join the debate around the water cooler or around the metaphorical bird bath. The roots of Chart Chat were in the debates that were had around building out the scenarios and the content of the Big Book of Dashboards, the original. And now that I'm part of the authoring team, I'm starting to see just how much fun those debates can be. We had a writing day at the end of TC for a whole day in San Diego. And it was so nice to get to banter a bit about the ways in which we agreed and disagreed once we showed up and could be in a room together looking at dashboards. So excited to have you all join the debate and add your comments in the chat box. We keep an eye on those and try to bring those up onto our stage. So today's topics, we'll talk first about a color primer, digging into the fundamentals of color with science and talking about things beyond kind of the basics of colors in Data Viz and thinking a little bit more about the informed decisions that we make. Then we'll dive into talking about accessibility. What would a color conversation be without accessibility, including considerations that go beyond avoiding red-green, though we know that those kind of considerations around color blindness are important. And finally, we'll talk about brand colors and data visualization. How do we translate marketing colors to the unique challenges of data viz design, especially when we're trying to use a wide-ranging palette, or maybe you're saddled with a brand palette that has a few primary colors that don't have really high contrast against each other. And so we'll talk about some of the challenges and the benefits of having great brand colors for data visualization. As we dive in today, we're going to tee up and talk first about color and color theory a little bit. And Lisa's going to dive into some of the nuances of the world of color. But oftentimes when we think about color, and just to level set on color in data visualization, in the Big Book of Dashboards, there's a great schematic that looks at 5 different ways we use color in Data Viz. There's sequential color, where color is ordered from low to high based on relative saturations of different colors. A single color. Then diverging color palettes, where there's a neutral midpoint that has a certain degree of meaning, where the 2 different colors diverge. Then categorical colors, where we need to have high enough contrast colors to compare one another and illustrate and attach color to different categories or groups to add meaning. Highlight colors, where we use color to highlight something against a gray background, with gray being a powerful color in Data Viz. And alerting colors, those colors used to get someone's attention. And I know as I'm building data visualizations and dashboards, I often fall into the space where I can say, yeah, I should use a sequential color palette or a diverging palette. But Lisa is someone who dives into some of the why we use these different palettes and kind of how they get applied in practice. And so I'm excited to let Lisa dive in and share a bit more about the world of color with us. Lisa, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. That was a super neat introduction. Let me see. These are my slides. Nice. Yeah. Again, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I do want to tell you a little bit about the science of color, as Amanda said, and especially introduce you to the concept of lightness, hue, and saturation. And if you already know it, then I want to bring it a little bit closer to you or dig a little bit deeper with you into that. So lightness, hue, and saturation are ingredients of a color. There are different ways of describing a color, but lightness, hue, and saturation are 3 of them. And so when picking colors, I ask you, or I would urge you or nudge you to consider all 3. So we will talk about the importance of lightness, hue, and saturation later on. What do they mean? Let's define some terms here. So lightness has some information about like how dark or light a color is. So simple, so good. It can also, or some people say, or like call it brightness or value. These are slightly, or like these terms mean slightly different things. It's not all the same, but I use them interchangeably in the next few, or like in the next hour. Then we have saturation, which can be said is the same as chroma, which describes how intense your color is. So the more saturated, the more bright, the more intense a color is. 0% saturation means your color is black or white or gray. And then we have hue, and hue is basically what people out there would call color. So it's yellow, pink, turquoise, blue. These are all hues. Like where on a color wheel are we? This is defined by the hue. And if that sounds familiar, then because lots of color pickers out there ask you to define the lightness, the saturation, and the hue. So in the Figma color picker, for example, you have HSL here, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. The HSB color space stands for hue, saturation, brightness. Tableau asks you to define the hue, saturation, and value. Again, value the same being as lightness. Adobe also asks you for HSB. You can often choose different color spaces in one tool. Another color space that defines all that is LCH. This is what we use at Datawrapper. So when you define a color in Datawrapper, you can also use the lightness, the saturation, and then the hue down here. When you're changing the color of parts of your visualization, you're probably changing all 3. So you sometimes might change just the lightness of your color. I don't think you ever change just the hue, because when you're changing the hue, when you're changing a color, you're often also changing the saturation and the lightness. So if you're just changing a hue, that would look like this. If you have like a pretty dark lightness, I don't think you do that. Most often you end at something like this. Intuitively, that means you're already changing lightness, saturation, and hue. But let's dig a little bit deeper here, because, and this is where it gets fascinating, because there's more to it than this. So Mansell was an American painter, Albert Mansell is his full name, who in the first decade of the 20th century came up with this whole concept of hue, saturation, and value. So he basically found out that you can describe every single color of the millions of colors out there with these three ingredients, with hue, saturation, and value. And so this is where HSV, HSB, HSL is based on. But these kind of models here, these cylinders up there, are kind of a lie, because this is not how color really works. This is not how we perceive color. Because Manel not just found out about hue, saturation, and lightness, he also found out that the saturation of each hue is very different for different levels of lightness. So this is a Manel color tree that's illustrating this. At the bottom, you have the dark colors. At the top, you have the light colors. Then the circle shows the hue. And then you have the saturation. The more out a panel, like one of these little panels is, the more saturated that color can be. And what you can see here already is that yellow can be more saturated when it's light, when it's very light, than, for example, blue. Blue can't be that saturated when it's very light. This is actually how the modern version of that looks like. Jacob Ross created that Manel spin on Observable, which I really like. It shows the same Manel tree, and it shows the same thing. Like even today, even with our very good big color gamuts that we have on modern monitors, this is still the situation. Like with yellow, for example, we only have it very saturated if it's very light. And then you can see blue and pink can be far more saturated than yellow and green. But blue is only very saturated here at the bottom, basically, and yellow only at the top. You can also see that in other tools. There's a really interesting tool called Chromaticity, which does the same thing. Let me check here. So there are different ways of showing colors that are more accurate than your normal square, where you have all the colors just stretched out from edge to edge. So this is the LCH color space. Again, this is what we're using in Datawrapper. And you can see the same phenomena. Like when you have very light colors up here, only yellow is super saturated, and light blue can't be that saturated as yellow at that level of lightness. Then you come then you get to a level of lightness where lots of colors are the same saturated, and then at the end of the spectrum here, when it gets very dark, you only have blue, which is still super saturated. It can be still super saturated, although it is that dark. I found it super fascinating. And if you're wondering what are the practical implications of that, well, this is one of the reasons why all these popular sequential color scales look like this. They all go from yellow or from light yellow to dark blue, because only dark blue can still be that saturated and is distinguishable at that level of lightness. For example, if you would have a green here or a red, and you would have that here at the other end or at the very dark spectrum, it would just be pitch black. You wouldn't see any saturation anymore. So this is why they're all using this yellow to dark blue way. Let's see. So when we talk about lightness, hue, and saturation, we also talk about how easy it is to tell apart all these things, or your colors. And the more different lightness and hue are of your colors, the easier they are to tell apart. So this is one of the main reasons also why they're cycling through hues, if you've ever wondered that. Why wouldn't you just have one color in a sequential color scale and have it go from light to dark? Well, because it's a little bit harder to distinguish between colors than if you cycle through hues too. If you use yellow, then orange, then magenta, then blue. This is the most or the best way so far we've come up to distinguish between colors. It's a little bit easier to distinguish between them if they also have a slightly different hue. It's actually also great for categorical colors. This is not just about sequential colors. This is not just about your heat maps and choropleth maps. If you ever need categorical colors, it's good practice to not just have different hues, but also to have different kinds of lightness for your colors. So these are actually picked here from this viridescent plasma color scale. So I picked this purple from here, and the green from here, and this light green from here. And this is working well. This is colorblind safe. This is if you ever need colors, I can recommend this approach. Okay, so far we talked about lightness and hue. let's not underestimate saturation though, because the higher the saturation of the colors, also the easier it is to tell them apart. We can see this here. For big areas, your less saturated colors like this purple and this brown beige here might still work. For lines, it gets a little bit harder, and then in scatter plots with small areas, this is indistinguishable. If you compare that with higher saturation, same colors, just like a higher saturation, this is way easier. I mean, it's still not a great chart, but it's better. You can easier tell them apart. And saturation sets the vibe. So a beautiful visualization like that, these are beautiful colors, right? And these ones too. And they work because they are less saturated, they're a little bit toned down. They set the vibe. As does this graphic, or like these Bloomberg graphics I really adore. I'm a big fan of Bloomberg charts, and they all have this these very saturated colors. And that's totally different from this one, right? Like saturation can be really used to set a vibe, to tone down the colors, bring it more like relaxed, or to say, okay, I'm a self-confident chart, and here are my colors, and here's my data. This is different here. And then, of course, hue saturation is the most important color in data visualization. Gray is the most important color in data visualization. It's so good to set the context with it, to use it as a background color. But no matter which chart you're creating, Quay is always great to bring your actual colors, your actual data points to the top. So this is a chart from the New York Times. Or then it isn't. This is the actual chart from the New York Times, and it looks so much better because the description is in Quay, the grid labels are in Quay, the grid itself is in Quay. Like lots of toned down colors there to make the actual lines here really shine. So no matter which kind of dashboard, visualization, chart, etc. you're creating, Quay can really be super powerful in making it more elegant, more professional looking. I wrote about all this in a blog post called How to Pick More Beautiful Colors for Your Data Visualization. So this was my short primer on hue, saturation, and lightness. But yeah, if you want to know more, this is the way to go.
Lisa. Oh, just a delight. I'm just sitting here like the kind of physics of color just are so fascinating. I mean, I made mention of kind of the fascination with the physics of all of this and all these different pieces. And Tim actually commented that it gets more complicated in paint mixing. We're doing subtractive color instead of additive color. So curious piece there. So as we kind of dig in and think about where this feels like in practice, I know we've got an interesting example from Steve around how we think about saturation and color in different ways. But anything that jumps out to you, Chart Chat colleagues, about kind of the notes from Lisa? Jeff is like immediately hands up. We're all going to go edit our instructional slides as we're teaching about color in our various courses now. Jeff.
I was just going to point out, I don't know if Lisa, you could pull up your second slide, where you had your original examples. The fascinating thing to me is not just about the effect of color on your data visualization, but I want to point out maybe you could go back a couple where it doesn't have the color boxes on it, but yeah, there you go. Thank you. I wanted to point out the gray bars at the bottom. And I don't know if everybody realizes that those gray bars are all the same color. They're all the same shade tone of gray. And the top row, just look how different that gray looks just based on the color around it. And so it's fascinating to me just not to think about the color you're using, but what the color you're using also affects the other colors that you're not intending to color data. So I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was really cool how you did that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, especially like I tried to make the point a little bit with here. If you choose yellow, it's always going to be a very bright color. If you choose like blue, it's probably a more like darkish, medium darkish color. So you're already choosing different lightnesses and saturations when choosing different hues, different colors.
I love that point and of that call out. Andy?
Yeah, Lisa, this is fantastic. I'm wondering, or observing, I'd love to see sort of people's knowledge and fear over time as they use color. In the, you start in data visualization and you just press the rainbow button in Excel. And then eventually you're just like, oh, maybe I should be a bit more careful with color. And you just oh, somebody says, oh, don't use red and green together. That's like maybe one of the first things. And then you open the door and you fall down the biggest rabbit hole in data visualization. I mean, we've just gone physics, chemistry, art. It's astonishing. So a question to you is, does knowing all of this make it easier or harder to pick colors for visualizations?
That's such a good question. It's a bottomless pit. Like we will talk later about like style guides. I actually interviewed some people who had or like wanted to take care of the colors for their style guides for data visualization. And some of them told me, yeah, I've been on it for like 9 months now and I know everything and I still don't have the style guide ready. It's crazy how much time you can spend thinking about color and where it all goes. To answer your question, I feel like I got a better understanding of color. Like I started that whole journey because I was super bad with color. And I feel like having that understanding now actually helps me to analyze data or like colors better. Like it helps me to analyze better why do these color work in other visualizations, which then also helped me improve my own visualizations, I would say. So yes, but it's dangerous to spend a lot of time on that.
I guess it becomes innate knowledge to an extent. So a lot of what you know is now absorbed into your choices, I suspect.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think one of the ways in which we sometimes see color and these kind of examples of saturation being used to, I'm probably going to be using the wrong word now, not saturation, used to go ahead and encode values and information on these sequential or diverging colors is with heat maps, which feature in marginal histograms, which if you happen to be at Tableau conference, you may have heard about, or last month's chart chat, how much Steve loves marginal histograms. But Steve, you had a couple examples of marginal histograms, and I'm wondering if we might just kind of talk about and explore a couple examples and look at how color gets used to encode information in terms of encoding data.
I would like feedback because there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm now reconsidering, and it falls under the category of what Steve Frankenary might call the curse of expertise. I look at it as the failure to see with fresh eyes. Things that seem obvious and clear to me aren't necessarily so obvious and clear to others. So let me show you a few things and then get your take on it and what's worked, what isn't, etc. And let's see, where am I in this lovely view of things? So we came across this pretty recently, some really stellar work from Ellen Blackburn and railway dashboard redesign. And I'm just going to focus on this first, which is just a heat map over time, 7 days, hour of the day, and certain things kind of popping out. You can see the Monday at 1300, that's really heavily saturated. And yes, but which day of the week gets the most activity, which hour of the day? And I really liked this marginal histogram from Ellen and had a discussion about it. And before I go any further, Lisa, any comments on this? What do you think of it? What do you think of the colors? What do you think of the technique of a marginal histogram to show this, etc.?
Oh, I really like marginal histograms, definitely. It's a great way to see the distribution for like every time, every weekday. It really adds to it. I think I like it a lot. I mean, now I'm super curious what's happening on Monday 1 p.m. It's this one big outlier.
Right.
I find the colors here very interesting. Like for these histograms, the color is slightly different than this more purpley colder color in the heat map itself, which I think is a good idea. If you would choose exactly the same color that you can also find in this sequential color scale from the heat map, then you might make your users wonder, like, what's going on? Like, why is this exactly the same color? Like, does that mean it's the same value as like Friday, I don't know, 8 a.m. or so, if it's exactly the Friday 8 a.m. color. So I think this is working well. I wonder how the chart looks like if you would also put a sequential color scale on these marginal histograms. Maybe it's too much. but maybe it can work. I would love to see that. And I'm also wondering, here is with the background color, because the background color does have like, goes in the same direction as as like these other tiles, like as the sequential color scale that is put on a heat map, which makes it look like super nicely tone in tone. Like I like how beautiful it all looks. It looks like it's all giving me the same vibe here. But it does make me wonder, for example, for like Friday 6 a.m., is that the background color, or is that an actual data point here that gets encoded by a color from this color scale? I mean, it works kind of for like this Tuesday, 3 p.m., 4 p.m., like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I see that these are not, that they don't have borders, and I think it was a good decision to not give them borders. But for every data point that's encircled by just like other data points, like Friday, 6 a.m., I wonder if it works well. And so I'd rather, I guess, have like a more neutral background color here to then have the colors shine more on top in the heat map itself.
This is actually a fascinating example, too, of the challenges I think we have when we start to create greater simplicity on our charts and graphs to the point of removing legends. I know I'm guilty of this when I'll sometimes show a demo or a chart to a colleague, and they've been trained that there always must be a legend, and I've put the kind of color cues in the title or somewhere else. And I do think that there are times when, I mean, people are looking for that cue of like, what does the darkest purple mean relative to the lightest purple in terms of that range and giving that insight? Because there's no clear legend here in terms of what those colors, those different saturations of that color mean.
True. Is there a legend somewhere else in a dashboard, or like somewhere else on this whole visualization?
I don't know if anybody's following the comments, but there were some really good comments about folks where if there's no border, it's a null, but because of the background color, imagine you have, a null surrounded by boxes. You couldn't really tell that there was no border around it. So you don't really know if Wednesday at 8 p.m. Is that null, or does that have a value because it's the same background color? So there's some really good comments going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we got another minute or so, here's the part I want to workshop, which is my own work on this. So this was a page from the book, The Big Picture, and where I was trying to get people excited about using a marginal histogram. So, hour of the day, day of the week, you can see where there's a lot of concentration of tech support calls. And this is what I proposed in the thing. And I'm getting a lot of pushback for putting a marginal histogram along the bottom. I am so used to seeing it this way. So there's I'm going to show you a few other variations, and then would love people's take on it. So, this is trying to have gray muted as opposed to similar colors. Here is using a similar hue, less saturation on this. And then why am I putting the things along the bottom and confusing people? Why not something like this? And have the bars going up, etc. So I've just shown you. Let's see. Do I have one more version of this thing? No. We'll come back to that version and somebody else's work in a minute. So I just showed you 4 iterations on these things. Which works best, or do none of them work particularly well? So there's the marginal histogram along the bottom, and then there's the what are the colors that should be using.
Andy, you've got a big smile on your face. Do you want to take a first crack at this and let Lisa study it for a moment? Or Lisa, do you want first crack at your feedback?
I feel like my views of marginal histograms have been part of many chart chats in the past. They're kind of cool, but they're really hard to read, and they take up weird amounts of space when put in a dashboard. That said, I kind of like the orange version pointing down in this case, Steve, even though I rail against the bars pointing down in previous episodes.
All right, Lisa.
In fact, Ken is just the comments are fantastic.
Comments
today,
are great.
by the way, everyone.
Yes.
Ken's just said that bars at the bottom imply negative numbers, right? And Jack's like, yeah, but I prefer the histogram at the top. Oh,
there's a lot of love for the gray though, team, and I'm definitely on team gray. I like the gray separation there. I'm like going to interject here. Have you ever moved and broken the space between the histogram and the heat map by moving the times in the middle of those two things on the right? Anyways, Lisa, any thoughts before we pivot over to our world of accessibility? How accessible are these histograms?
They're okay accessible, but I agree. I'm also team Quay. You wouldn't want to confuse readers with having a similar color, I would think, that in the heat map than in the bars, because like you basically give colors a meaning with this heat map, and then you reuse the same color. Where this could be tricky. I think it could confuse some people. But yeah, I also think the bars at the bottom, at the top, work better. But in Quay, I like Quay.
All right, Jeff, you're the only one who hasn't voted. Your preference? Gray, colored, top, bottom?
In this example, I'd say I prefer the gray. I was going to have a comment. You could dual encode the orange so that you had light to dark orange so that you could see noon was, the heaviest, and it was a darker orange so that you're not confusing that single color of orange. But I prefer the gray. And I don't think we've talked about, that might be perfect for the screen here and for the book, but when you put it on a projector, you might not be able to see that gray. So,
oh yeah, that's true.
As you know, Jeff, I've been struggling with that, and you were the person who pointed it out when we were doing this thing live. Where I don't want these things to yell too much, so I'll make them very light. And it was like, well, they're so light, they're silent. So. Show just a couple other things here just to get people's take of some other people doing some work on this stuff. John Miller, I think, produced this a day or two ago. Just different examples of these things. Some experiments we had of do we put it at the bottom? Do we put it at the top? And really early versions of some marginal histograms in the Tableau world. This is from Ben Jones, and this is from Shine Pukanithra, and with scatter plots.
So there's a lot here in terms of a lot of different colors and different spaces that raise the question around kind of how we're encoding information and using color to encode values or to encode categories and start to differentiate between groups and a lot of the ways we use things. And I love the comment about kind of how loud the color sounds, because I mean, that speaks to me to this great pivot over into the world of accessibility, and colors are something that rely on our vision to see. So Lisa, let's talk a little bit about accessible colors and how we focus on accessibility, including but beyond red and green.
Yes, let's do that. All right, I have some bad news for all the examples I just saw. They don't have enough high contrast according to the Worldwide Web Consortium, but let's talk about it in a second. When we talk about accessible colors, we do talk about high contrast and colorblind friendliness. I would say these are the two big topics. You want colors to have enough high contrast to the background, for example, and you want them to work for our colorblind friends as well. So let's talk about the high contrast first. The smaller your elements are, the bigger the color contrast between them should be. So colors work differently depending on how big they are, how far they are away from each other. Here's an example for that. The color contrast kind of works okay for here. You can distinguish between them. You can still tell them apart. That doesn't work down here anymore. In practical terms, what works in an area chart might not work in a line chart. And you could be the person, you could be the designer as this 538 designer who actually chooses different colors for bigger areas and smaller areas. Like for bars, like this bar here has a slightly different color. It's less saturated and slightly lighter, brighter than this line down here. Same with the red. This is brighter and less saturated than this red down here. The further away the elements are from each other, the harder it is also to distinguish between them, which is important for example, choropleth maps or the heat maps we've just seen. So this works, this doesn't. So when you choose colors at the size you use them in, I recommend to choose this palette, because then you can really do that. You see how your colors look like in big areas, how they look like in small areas. This is especially important when we go to the style guides later on, because for each visualization, of course, you can use the colors that work well for the specific visualization. But then if you define colors that work for the whole organization, no matter which visualization they're creating, then that gets very important to check these colors. But when we talk about high contrast, then we also talk about text contrast. The smaller your text is, the higher its color contrast to the background should be. Here we see that in practice, this doesn't work so well. You can increase the text size, or you can increase the contrast to the background. Like in this case, this Germany label is yeah, a little bit darker and a little bit has more of like a hue, is more saturated than this Germany color label. And then we have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines by the World Wide Web Consortium. And if you're a part of a big organization and you're designing visualizations for them, you might have heard of them. They say that text should have a lightness contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1 if it's small text, and large text can have a contrast ratio of at least 3 to 1. And there are lots of tools out there that let you check that. And of course, this should also apply to data visualization on screens. So I can recommend this tool, color.review. But for data visualization, it's not really clear how this should play out. Like for the shapes itself, the World Wide Web Consortium say in their guidelines that shapes should have at least a 3 to 1 contrast ratio, which means yellow on white or a light gray background is not accessible, doesn't follow these guidelines. You would need to tone down and make that yellow darker, or you could use outlines. I mean, outlines is really a good solution here, I would say. And Kent Eisenhut from Google, he actually wrote a recent blog post on that, how Google uses these outlines to still meet the guidelines, but yeah, still has like very clear, this is more important than this, like still have a clear focus in their colors. You could also, or you need to, if you want to follow these guidelines, you need to separate areas with a white stroke. You need to bring some white space in between, because the guidelines say that neighboring colors also need to have a 3 to 1 lightness ratio. That means this doesn't work, but this works, because here you have the ratio to the white, and that's 3 to 1, and then you have this ratio again. So this works good. Well, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, again, they're not really created with data visualizations in mind. And so they do have some problems I want to point out here. For example, earlier we talked about sequential color scales. And if we look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and if they're conform with that, then we have to say no. Like, this is a hard cut. You can't get lighter than this on this light gray or white background while being accessible in these guidelines format. Which also means if you have less of a range in your lightness in, for example, your choropleth map, then it's actually harder to tell apart certain areas. Like in this not Web Content Accessibility Guidelines conform choropleth map, you can see that you can still kind of distinguish between these two counties here. The same is not true for this one, which is conform though. So there are really some trade-offs to make here. Also, the size of the shapes is not really taken into account in these guidelines. So this one doesn't meet the guidelines. This one with very light, very, very thin lines does meet them, because this turquoise and this color, or like this turquoise, is a little bit darker than this one. And if you're a smart designer, you need to follow the guidelines. I can recommend to just go dark, because the lightness ratio it doesn't look more accessible, but it is more accessible in this guidelines form if you have like bright text on a dark background. So this is accessible. This actually is accessible a 4.9 to 1 ratio, while this is only accessible for large text. So it has a worse ratio, this gray text on a white background, but it objectively looks, well, I would say this is more accessible when I look at it. But yeah, the guidelines would disagree.
This is fascinating, Lisa. And I think digging into kind of questions about contrast and what that looks like. I think we talk about color blindness a lot more. We talk about contrast less. And I think it's one of those, to your point, on the first thing we start to hear is make things colorblind friendly and use a simulator maybe if you're getting more sophisticated. And I think one of the comments that came up here about specifically about contrast, I think if you even go back to some of the other comparison slides, maybe to the map, is this question about this kind of tension in between charts looking cool, the kind of pure design aesthetics of color, and then usability and how we balance those two things together. And I do think it's an interesting tension in terms of things that, like, at a gut instinct, you're like, one of these might look better or worse to me, but not be accessible. How do you balance that kind of tension of thinking about accessibility and aesthetics together?
This is really hard. It is really a tension. And I don't think database designers have figured it out yet. Like, I feel Ken Eisenhut, who I showed earlier, this one, he was really like kind of on the forefront of thinking about that, about like trying to design beautiful charts which are still accessible. I mean, this is his job at Google. But yeah, I think we're still, I've heard that quote once, we're still in the early days of accessibility for data visualization. And I think that that's true when it comes to the official guidelines. Like, I feel like they should be adjusted, and I think they are adjusted as we speak. And then we hope we have good enough guidelines that we can then still think about like how to make them more beautiful. But yeah, it really depends on which kind of organization you're working for. Like, if you only have 20-year-old with perfect, nice laptops, then you don't need to think about accessibility as much if you're working in a government organization that caters to all kinds of people with all kinds of vision impairments, etc.
Great question. Andy, Steve, Jeff, have you kind of seen how this translates in the world of dashboards, especially, and in the world of business in terms of thinking about these contrast components? Do they come up in your conversations?
I increase it. It is amazing, the point about contrast. You know, in the first, 10 years of working in this field, nobody really said contrast. They said think about colorblind, but I hear it a lot more these days. I think maybe as, within Tableau, as we added more flexibility to the way you can do background coloring, suddenly it's like, oh, now you can do really small text and gray on gray text, and nobody can read that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I guess somebody had a comment about the the give and take, or the dichotomy between the design aspect and the contrast, right? And Lisa, your slides point that right out. Is we think about muting things with a light gray, pushing text back to make it less emphasis on something we don't want to see. So it's like the graphic design elements of this that would tell you, oh, maybe we want to make this a lighter gray. And I think it was Tim who said that, against the contrast, but we're going to make it harder to read from a contrast standpoint. So I think we're going to be doing this balancing act in our designs.
I mean, I studied graphic design. I'm a huge fan of good aesthetics, and yeah, it's hard for me too to have to balance accessibility. I'm glad I'm not working in such an organization that cares too much about it, like in one of these organizations who create data visualizations. I mean, we at Datawrapper, of course, think a lot about accessibility, have like a colorblind simulator, think about contrast a lot, etc., because our users need to at their organizations. But personally, when I create a visualization just for fun, I don't need to care. And I really like that.
I think as we kind of think about this and how this translates, I'd love to kind of table and maybe incentivize a few of you to come join us for the after party and talk more about that like lens of colorblind accessibility and colorblindness in the after party and dig into that a bit more. Lisa has some great articles that dive into that theme in a little bit more depth and detail that I'd highly encourage you to check out. And we'll be sharing some of those links as we wrap up. So the after party afterwards, great time to talk more about those different components.
Can we just bring this one slide up again,
Yep.
though? Because for this point, like, we don't need to care. If you don't want to care about like color contrast for your shapes, and this one, of course, like none of these shapes, I think, meet this 3:1 ratio to the background. You can still make the lives of your users or readers easier if you adjust the color of your text, and I would nudge you to do so. This is important. Like, although 20-year-old might be 20-year-olds might be confused by your colors because they look like this. This is hard to read.
And this is one of those points where the tool you use might influence whether you can do this, because doing that in Tableau is hard. Changing the saturation of label and pipe and mark type is not easy.
Yeah, we'd actually do it by default in Datawrapper. So if you upload such a crazy yellow line here, we always try to bring the contrast up to these automatic labels at the side.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Interesting. I love thinking about how design the defaults and tools enable or detract from our ability to do these kind of things, which I think comes up a lot in terms of the challenges we have and how and what we're working with. So I know as we think about kind of colors, there's been some interesting questions about kind of in the chat about the stories attached to color and the meaning we attach to color, the kind of color and colors and culture. And I think a lot of that comes back over and connects to this closing kind of segment around brand colors and talking a little bit more about kind of the use of color to create or reinforce a brand and some of the challenges in translating an existing brand into a Data Viz color palette. So Lisa, do you want to share a few insights for us around some of your thinking about doing that brand work? And then we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up our chart chat for today.
Sure thing. So as mentioned before, I talked to quite some people about how they integrate colors into a data visualization style guide in their organizations. And when talking to these people, like they were at different kinds or like at different stages of their design process. And when I talked to them and they were still at the very beginning, they often had this one question. It's like, should I use the logo colors or should I not, and how? I kind of want to broaden your options here. It's not just an either or. There are different ways you could or could not use the logo color. Like one way is to just don't do it, like NPR does. NPR, US newsrooms, public media, they have red and blue as their logo colors, which in the US stand for the Democrats and the Republicans. So it would confuse people if they would use it in every single chart, because these readers would think that all these charts are about politics. So they just don't use the logo colors. They defined colors in a data visualization style guide that kind of have their own brand now. Like I still recognize NPR charts because of these colors they use. These are the colors that they use. You could also only use the logo color in neighboring use. I mean, this is what management consulting firms are doing. For example, Boston Consulting, they have Quay as their brand color. They do everything in Quay, their logos in Quay, their website is in Quay, and their charts are all in Quay. It doesn't matter what the chart is about, it's in Quay. The competitor, McKinsey and Company, they do everything in blue. And guess what? The charts are all in blue too. They actually started, they went from a very colorful palette, like a few years ago, to just blue charts. So they really limited themselves in the range of colors, the range of use they can use. And actually, only recently, they started to introduce a little bit of red or a little bit of green again. But for a long time, they only used blue. And then we have Bain & Company, another competitor in the management consulting space. And guess what? It's all red. So yes, you could only use the logo color if you wanted really strong brand recognition. But you need to consider if people can refer to your colors. This is actually something I haven't thought about, or I didn't think about at all before doing this research. So you want people to talk about your colors. If you have a dashboard, if you present your colors, you want people to be like, can you again explain what color X means? And you can't really do this if you have only shades of a color. It's not ideal. It's like, can you, like for 3 colors, it might still work, but like for 5 colors or so, it's like, can you, this slightly bluer, darker color than the other very dark color, you would need to refer to that like this. Having colors that don't have names is also not ideal. Like, how would you call these names? Okay, this might be orange, but this is like yellow or greenish yellow. And then you have aubergine here. So this is also hard for people to refer to. So this is very easier if you actually have hues that we have names for in our culture, like yellow, orange, blue. Third option is to use the logo color, but only for charts with one category, which is also something I didn't think about. But like the Finnish marketplace, fin.no does that. So if they have a chart with just one color, like a bar chart, they use abstraction or like an adjustment of their logo color, which is like bluish. But if they have more than one category in their charts, they don't use that color at all. They just use different colors because they say, otherwise people think that the blue, like if this slide would be blue, it would be the most important one because it is in this logo color, which is something I've never considered actually. That's interesting. You can also adjust the logo colors. Like people will still recognize your logo and your brand if it's slightly adjusted. If you don't want to use exactly the super saturated bright colors that are in your logos, you can tone down the saturation a little bit, make them a little bit darker, easier to look at, easier to the eyes, and it still works. Same with the background color. If your logo has a very light color, you could use it as a background color. That also works. Or you could just, I mean, this is what I guess most people are doing. You can, if you need to choose colors, you can choose colors with you should choose colors with a vibe similar to your logo color. So if all the options don't work for you and you just want to go this normal way of defining new colors for your brand, defining new data visualization colors, then I guess it's a good idea to ask yourself, what do people associate with my company? If my company would be a car, would it be like small and cute, or would it be like big and professional? And if it would be like, I don't know, like a painting, which colors would it have? And asking silly questions like that can really let you define the vibe of your logo colors. Should I go on?
Oh my, there's so much we could dive into here. Yeah, let's take a pause for a minute and talk about kind of this translation of logos, because I think we could dive into this world of like, how many colors do I need and different components. But as we think about that translation, there's some great comments in the chat just about ways in which some of the brand guides also address some of the accessibility bits, right? So things like looking at Georgia Tech actually having guidelines on when you've got tech gold on a white background, substitute tech medium gold, and trying to reinforce some of these design practices through the brand style identity guide. And I think that's a really interesting and really important point to reiterate, because I think Trisha made the point earlier in big all caps, we should all care about accessibility, which is absolutely true. It's worth yelling and screaming about. We should all care. But there are times at which we want to look for ways that we can enable people to do things more easily and with less friction, right? To make things accessible. And the more that we kind of make it easier for people to use branded colors by having that style guide and have those inbuilt-in tools, the better off we are. So yeah, Jeff, did you have thoughts on the brand translation piece? All right, I felt like you were raising your hand, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I wasn't raising my hand. I put in the comments, you know, I live in Cincinnati, and it's like the town of the Cincinnati Reds, and their Tableau server is just all red, right? And, you know, University of Cincinnati is red and black, and it's like, gosh, the whole town is on alert, you know, but it's not really true. It's all just the branding guides, right?
Yeah. One of the things I hear sometimes from colleagues, because I love a good monochromatic dashboard with a couple highlight colors, is the pushback of it looks boring and everything looks the same. Did anyone else ever hear that from clients who are looking for a little bit more of a rainbow?
Yes.
Andy.
A common hearing.
And what do you say back to that, Lisa? Like, what would you say back, maybe in line with looking at kind of how many colors do you need? I know that was where we were going next year, is kind of the number of colors you need and how you approach that.
Yeah, I can just skip to this thing then.
Can I just interrupt and share a little tiny bit of Tableau history trivia?
Yes, please.
Based on something you said. So let me just share my entire screen. It's really interesting you raising the point about named color palettes. Right. So I happen to have a depressing chart about global sea temperatures open on my desktop, but the original Tableau palette. So this was the original Tableau palette designed by color expert Maureen Stone. So this palette was designed precisely for the reason you raised, Lisa, that we could name all of these colors. And I always found that absolutely fascinating. And the default color is blue because that is perceived as a very sort of corporate safe, normal color as well. There's so much intentional choice in this palette that was designed 20 years ago. So
and still exists in Tableau today.
And still exists. Tableau Classic.
Tableau Classic.
Yeah.
So did Tableau Classic have enough colors, Lisa, in its color palette?
Yes, they did. No, Maureen Stone did an absolute great job with that. I really adore her work.
Yeah.
But yeah,
right.
Some organizations choose more colors, especially if they're really big, like the London City or Start. They feel like they need to cover all edge cases, so they define a lot of colors. And you could do that for your organization, or you could go the complete opposite and be like Quartz or McKinsey, as we've seen earlier, just staying with one hue, maybe neighboring hues, just staying with blue, like McKinsey or Quartz only has like this pink and blue, and they've had it for years, and they kind of make every chart work with it. I really like this approach, which is for me the most reasonable. You select a few hues, you select a few shades, but then that's it. The economy does that, and The Economist, I feel like, does a wonderful job. Like, I recognize an Economist chart immediately, not just because of like this red line here, but also because of the colors they use. And what they also use, and what I can recommend to do, what I've heard multiple times works really well, is to set an order. You don't just want to define some colors, define 5, 6, 7, 8 colors, and throw them all at your team, at your coworkers. You also want to say, okay, if you have just one line, maybe just use blue. If you have 2 lines, use these 2. If you have 3 lines, etc. But of course, like, maybe you have some topics, you have some color associations going on. If the colors don't work, what the Urban Institute is actually doing, they define color combinations. So they say, if you have 2 colors in your chart, you can either use this combination or this combination. If you have 3 colors in your chart, use either this combination or this combination or this color combination, which I think is really smart. And I mean, for these ones too, like all of these organizations with these giant color palettes, they all defined a very rigid order in which their staff should use these colors. And it's so important to define the order to really document well how you want these colors to be used.
Well, I'm gonna put a pin in where we are, Lisa, as we kind of get to this place, and say there's a lot more we can talk about at the after party in terms of discussing all the various different things that go into these nuances. But what I see here is reducing decision fatigue on the part of data visualization developers. And rather than seeing these kind of things as constraints, seeing this as, how do I provide guidance for someone who doesn't know how to make that decision themselves? And so before we go ahead and wrap up, I would say, thank Lisa, there's just such a wealth of information and knowledge you bring on color. Like, I mean, I could just listen to you talk about color for ages. Maybe we'll get that workshop going back up again, but we want to wrap up Chart Chat 51 and say a huge thanks to Lisa for joining us and give you a few previews for things coming down the pike for our Chart Chat folks over the course of the next month or so. So if you missed us at the Tableau conference, Chart Chat 52 is going to be One Chart 4 Ways extended cut. Director's cut, actually having time to talk about our feelings and thoughts on each other's work, which we didn't have a lot of time to do in the 40 minutes at TC. So we'll have a full hour digging into One Chart 4 Ways. That will be Thursday, June 20th at 11 a.m. And we hope you'll join us there. I also want to flag that Outlier Conference is coming up in a month. We will have just wrapped up the Outlier Conference. It's going to be fabulous and has an amazing speaker lineup. The speaker lineup is also posted in the chat box if you're curious about who you can hear from. People like Steve Frankenary, Gabrielle Marie, Eli Holder, and many others from across the Data Viz world. So please go ahead and make sure to grab your virtual or Chicago ticket so you can join us for that big event hosted by the Data Visualization Society. Steve has some stuff coming up under the realm of workshops, recordings, and resources. Steve, you've got a workshop coming up?
I do. My first actual in-person workshop in eons in conjunction with the Marketing Analytics Summit in Phoenix on June 5th. And I think we have a lovely little, let's see, there we go. And that's where you can,
there we go.
We had it. There you go. bigpic.me/workshop.
Excellent. So if you're making your way down to Phoenix, Arizona, you can spend quality time with Steve learning all about building great quality dashboards. And this brings us to the end of Chart Chat number 51. We are excited. Mark says, let's bring Lisa back for part 2. That's the after party, Mark. That's the after party, Mark. And going off script, and you can vent all you need to about your brand colors and ask Lisa those sticky questions about translating your logo into brand colors and getting her insights and knowledge. So you can join the after party at bigpic.me/after. We'll go ahead and post an additional link into the chat. So you can go ahead and click on that link there if you're joining us live. That Zoom room opens up immediately after the big event and our big conversation with Lisa. With that, though, Lisa, it has been just beyond delightful to have you here and to learn about all your insights on color. I cannot wait to read your book whenever it does come out and be able to see the aggregation of all this goodness all in one space that sits on a shelf. So thank you so much for all the work you do to make this accessible and usable, and your journey on starting from a place of feeling like you were bad at color, how you took your journey and turned it into one of the best community Data Viz resources out there. So thank you for all of that work.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Of course. Well, we'll hop on over to the after party, and I hope that we'll see some folks there. Lisa, thank you again for your time. And with that, we'll wrap up Chart Chat number 51 and hope to see you back next week as we move on to Chart Chat 52. Farewell, my friends, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.